I'm 49 now, and I don't remember the exact year this happened, but I know I was in my early 30s at the time, definitely not older than 35, back when I was still driving long distances at night and didn't always plan my routes as carefully as I should have. That night, I was driving home on a main road, and I realized too late that I was going to run low on fuel. There was a gas station a few miles down a darker side road, so I took the turn without thinking too much about it, because it made more sense than trying to turn back. The road to the station was narrow and poorly lit, the kind of road where your headlights feel like they barely reach far enough. And by the time I arrived, the place already felt wrong. There was one car parked by the pumps, and I remember noticing a woman sitting in the passenger seat staring straight ahead, completely still. And even though that alone didn't mean anything, it stuck with me because she didn't react at all when I pulled in. I filled up my car quickly and went inside to pay. And the man behind the counter immediately made me uncomfortable, not because he did anything specific, but because his movements were slow and off, his eyes lingering a little too long, and the whole interaction felt strained, like he was distracted by something. What made it worse was that I didn't see the driver of the other car inside the station, which struck me as odd, but I assumed he was probably in the restroom. I paid without saying much and left as quickly as I could. And the moment I got back into my car, I had a strong feeling that I shouldn't stay there any longer than necessary. So I pulled away immediately. At that point, I decided to keep driving along that same road instead of going back to the main one, because I knew these roads and I knew they would lead me home. The road grew darker as I went, winding through forest with no lights and no signs of life. And after a while, the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own engine and tires on the pavement. That was when I heard something inside the car. At first, it sounded like movement, a subtle shift behind me. And before I could even process what that meant, I heard a voice close enough that it felt like it was coming from the back seat. I was so scared that for a moment, I felt like I lost touch with my body. I looked in the mirror and saw the silhouette of a woman. I don't even remember what went through my head. The shock hit me so hard that I lost control of the car, and I remember swerving sharply to the right before crashing into a tree, the impact knocking the wind out of me and leaving me disoriented and struggling to understand what had just happened. I stumbled out of the car, dazed and panicked, and that's when I saw movement behind me. Someone climbing out from the back of my vehicle, confirming that I hadn't imagined the voice at all. Instinct took over, and I ran straight into the forest without stopping to think, because I knew that area well enough to trust my sense of direction. Before I disappeared completely into the trees, I saw headlights pull up behind my crashed car, another vehicle stopping as someone got out and went straight to the woman. And that was the moment I understood they were together. They started chasing me into the forest, calling out, moving fast. But I didn't slow down, because I knew that if I stopped, I wasn't getting out of there alive. I pushed myself harder than I ever had before, cutting through paths I knew by memory, ducking between trees and over uneven ground, until eventually the sounds behind me faded and I realized I had lost them. I didn't stop running until I was certain I was safe. And when I finally made it home, shaken and injured, I called the police and told them everything. Later, the police came to my home and told me that earlier that night, the man working at the gas station had been badly injured, and that the people responsible might be the same ones who chased me. The police believed they were trying to get rid of me because I had seen the driver clearly enough to give a description. After that, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid they would come back for me, and I lived under constant stress where every sound bothered me. And I felt like no matter where I was, someone might be watching me. About a week later, The police told me that my description helped them identify and catch the people responsible. But even now, years later, I live with the fear of what might happen if they're ever released, because knowing someone once hid in the back of my car, spoke to me in the dark, and tried to erase me as a witness is something that never really leaves you. I'm 35 now, and this happened about a year ago, back when I lived in this neighborhood and had a routine that involved coming home late at night more often than I probably should have. That night, I was walking home from a friend's place after a long night out, and instead of sticking to the main streets, I decided to cut through a small neighborhood park that I'd passed through hundreds of times before, mostly because it saved me a few minutes, and I'd never had a reason to avoid it. It was well after sunset. The playground lights were off. The park was empty like it usually was at that hour, and the weather was calm and quiet. I was about halfway through the park when I noticed someone ahead of me, standing near one of the swings. And at first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking at, or if my eyes were playing tricks on me, because I'd never seen a homeless person in this park before. But it was definitely a person. When I stopped and looked more carefully, I realized it was a man dressed in a clown costume. And what immediately stood out to me was that he didn't belong there, especially at that time of night. At first, I honestly thought it might be some kind of bad joke or someone trying to get a reaction because that was easier to accept than anything else. But what made me slow down wasn't the costume itself. It was how still he was, just standing there with his arms hanging at his sides, facing the path. I remember thinking about whether I should just walk past him or turn around and go back to the main road. I slowed down instinctively and kept watching him, not even daring to take out my phone, because when you're in the dark, your eyes adjust, and the last thing I wanted was to blind myself by looking at a screen and then be stuck trying to readjust my vision while dealing with some stranger in a dark park. I stood there for a moment, and that's when his head turned toward me. I started walking backwards slowly, keeping my eyes on him because every instinct I had told me not to turn my back, and at the same time, he started moving toward me. As I kept backing up, my attention was so focused on him that I didn't notice what was behind me until I bumped into something solid and almost lost my balance. I turned my head, and that's when I saw him, another clown, standing right behind me, so close that I could smell him. And when I looked up at his face, he smiled in a way that made my stomach drop, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Then he leaned in slightly and said my name. How could he possibly know my name? Hearing it come out of his mouth froze me in place for a split second, because in that moment, I knew this wasn't random, and whatever was happening wasn't meant to be a joke. For a brief moment, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, because now there were two of them. One in front of me and one behind me. Both smiling, both completely silent. That's when panic finally hit. I tore myself free and started running without thinking. And when I looked back while moving, I saw that they weren't running after me. They were just walking, calmly, following me in a way that felt far more threatening than if they'd been chasing me at full speed. I didn't stop until I reached a street with proper lighting. And once I hit that stretch of road, I kept running toward my place with everything I had left, even though by then I couldn't hear footsteps behind me, and I couldn't see anything following me either. When I finally got home, I was still shaking, and for a long time, I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd followed me, that they knew where I lived, and that at any moment they could break the door down. I didn't sleep at all that night, and for the next 2 days, I barely left my apartment, replaying everything over and over in my head, trying to understand how he could have known my name. About 3 days later, sometime in the evening, around 10 p.m., I was still at home, exhausted, getting ready to finally try to sleep, and for no real reason, I decided to look out the window that faces the main street. and that's when I saw him. One of them was standing right across the street, in front of my building. I remember thinking, oh my God, they know where I live. That fear I'd been carrying for days suddenly felt real, and worse, justified, because just when I'd started telling myself I needed to move on and get back to my life, one of them showed up again. That night, I moved a piece of furniture in front of the door and just sat there in silence, expecting someone to come in at any moment. But no one did. Over the next few days, I did nothing but look for a new place to live. I was so desperate to get out of there that I found one within 3 days. Eventually, I moved out, and I forced myself to start going out again. But after that night, I stopped walking home alone after dark, and if I had to be out late, I took a taxi or public transport instead, avoiding being alone at night whenever I could. To this day, I still don't know what those people were doing or why they followed me, whether they just wanted to scare me or if they had something else planned. But hearing my name that night changed something in me. Seeing one of them outside my building days later made it worse. And even now, I still catch myself checking the windows every night. And sometimes I still dream about them. And while I don't think I'll ever fully get over what happened, I've just learned to live with it. I'll keep this short and get straight to what happened. Back in 2010, I was 16. At the time, my life felt like the most ordinary thing in the world, and the biggest drama at the same time, just school, phones, chats, boredom that sat heavy on you, and that constant feeling that everything important was happening somewhere else. My parents were out one evening, and 2 of my friends came over to spend the night at our place. We grabbed something quick to eat, put on some music quietly, and then started wondering what to do. Somehow, like most teenage brilliant ideas, the conversation drifted to a Ouija board. We weren't into the occult or anything, and we didn't seriously believe in ghosts. We went downstairs to the quieter part of the house, put the board on the floor, and dimmed the lights. My friends laughed like they already knew nothing was going to happen, and of course, nothing happened. After about half an hour, we got bored. I told myself it was childish, and we packed the board away, went upstairs, and went to bed. My parents came home later, checked on us, and went to sleep. The house felt normal and quiet. That night, though, I woke up to a sound. At first, my brain tried to explain it in the calmest way possible. Pipes, wood, wind. But it wasn't like a house creaking, it had a rhythm. It sounded like someone was actually knocking. It was clear enough to wake me up, but not loud enough to scare me right away. It just made me fully awake. I sat up in bed and listened. One of my friends stirred, then the other one. We looked at each other in the dark. No one said anything, but all 3 of us knew we were hearing the same thing. One of them whispered and asked if it was coming from downstairs, and I nodded because that's exactly where it felt like it was coming from. We stood there for a few minutes until the sound stopped. The silence came back so suddenly, it almost felt mocking, like something had checked if we were awake, and then decided to stop. In the morning, we laughed about it. We told each other we'd been scared out of our minds. My friends left around lunchtime, and everything felt normal again. My parents hadn't heard anything, and I didn't really tell them. To be honest, I just didn't want to sound stupid. But the next night, I woke up again. The same rhythm, but this time, it felt closer. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the hallway, sometimes from the wall itself. My breathing got short and shallow, and I got out of bed and locked my door. I was terrified. I genuinely believed something paranormal was happening because of that Ouija board, and I had no idea what to do. My parents didn't hear anything again. In the morning, I finally told them everything, and they looked at me with that adult look, a mix of tiredness and concern. My mom asked if I'd been sleeping, My dad asked if I'd watched something scary. After 2 more nights, when I looked pale and exhausted from barely sleeping, they started talking quietly to each other, thinking I couldn't hear them. They were careful with their words, but the meaning was clear. They thought something was wrong with me, mentally. I think they were considering sending me to a psychiatrist. After 4 days of hearing the knocking, always in the evenings, always the same rhythm, even I started wondering if I was losing my mind. One night I begged them to stay in my room so they could hear it too. That night, nothing happened, and they were angry because I'd kept them up for nothing. The next morning, I woke up to my mother screaming. I ran into the hallway and saw it on the wall written in crayon. "I am here." My mother looked at me, and my father didn't say anything at first. He just took a deep breath and slowly let it out, like he was trying not to explode. They asked me if I had done it. I couldn't even get angry. I was hit with this overwhelming feeling of loneliness, like in a nightmare where you're screaming and no one can hear you. They decided I had written it. They thought I was doing it for attention, that I was a teenager acting out. And the more I insisted it wasn't me, the more convinced they became that it was. That's when everything started. The evaluations, the conversations, the psychiatrist, the therapist, soft voices, careful questions about anxiety. I sat there and felt like someone trapped inside their own body, like the truth couldn't make it out of my mouth, no matter how hard I tried. One day we came home and the house felt wrong, not broken into, just disturbed. One light was on. The radio was playing very quietly, like someone didn't want to be noticed. A chair at the table had been moved. The door to one of the rooms was slightly open. This time my parents didn't look at me suspiciously because they knew I'd been with them all day. There was no way I could have done anything. My father pulled out his phone and called the police. They checked the house, opened closets, looked under beds, walked through every room, and found nothing. Then they left in that tone that basically says there's nothing they can do. That evening, we were sitting in the kitchen having dinner when the kitchen door suddenly burst open. A boy ran into the room. He was about my age, dirty. His eyes were swollen like he hadn't slept in days. He smelled awful, like someone who had been living outside, and he was holding a knife. Everything happened so fast. We all jumped up. My father reacted first purely on instinct. It was the only time in my life I ever saw real fear in him. And even then, he covered it by stepping in front of me. He positioned himself between me and the boy. Then everything became chaos. A chair tipped over. My mother screamed. My father lunged toward the boy's arm. The knife flashed in the light. I stumbled back, and pure animal panic took over my body. My mother grabbed me, and we ran, barefoot, slipping, almost falling as we rushed out through the other door. I remember her yelling at me to run and not look back. My dad was right behind us. One of our neighbors heard the noise and called the police. This time they showed up much faster, and when we all walked into the kitchen, he was already sitting at the table, in the exact spot where we'd been eating just minutes earlier. The knife was placed neatly in front of him, and he was eating, chewing as if nothing was wrong. He looked at the officers like they were the ones who didn't belong there. When they started questioning him, the truth came out slowly and painfully. It was a boy I'd been texting with online. Apparently, he'd been using a different name in someone else's pictures. But at the same time, I remember him being polite, normal, and nice. It turned out he lived in a nearby town and had started following me, watching me go to school, watching me when I got home, learning my routine. He knew when I was alone and when my parents weren't home. And then one night when my dad told me to stop texting online boys, he was there and he heard it. Apparently that's when something in him snapped. Not jealousy like you see in movies, but a sick, obsessive idea that we were being separated and that this wasn't allowed to happen. He had broken into our house while we were gone, and he stayed for an entire week. To this day, I don't know what he was planning to do. I don't know if had I stepped out of my room even once at night, I would have disappeared forever, or if something else would have happened. And even now, years later, I still listen to every sound in the house, because once you learn how easily someone can enter your life without permission, that fear never completely leaves you. I'm in my early 40s now, but this happened when I was 27. At the time, I really wanted to be independent, and for about 4 months, I was living in another state, away from my parents, completely on my own. And honestly, I was doing really well. I had a job, I was supporting myself, and I had rented a 2-story house. I bring that up because back then, for someone my age to be able to afford living alone in a rented 2-story house felt like a huge achievement. The house itself wasn't isolated, but it wasn't in the city either. It sat on the edge of town on a very quiet street, and behind the house, there was nothing but forest. I liked the place. It was peaceful, normal, one of those places that doesn't make you feel like you need to be on guard. That night, I got home later than usual. It was cold and the fog was so thick that my headlights barely lit up the driveway. When I got out of the car, the first thing I noticed was the smell of something burning. It was very strange because of the fog. I couldn't place it. I'm not completely sure what it was, but it stuck with me because it felt out of place, like someone had just been there. I didn't worry too much because our street wasn't busy and there weren't random people passing through. I looked around, but the fog swallowed everything. I told myself I was imagining it and that I was probably just tired. The rest of the evening at home felt completely normal, and there was nothing to worry about, so I went to bed around 11 p.m. I woke up later to a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't a bang or anything that made me jump. It was more like a feeling, something that pulled me out of sleep. At first, I thought maybe I'd forgotten to do something, or that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the longer I lay there, the more uncomfortable I felt. So what felt like the most natural thing to do was getting out of bed and looking out the window. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing in my yard, smoking, looking straight at my house. Almost immediately after that, I heard movement downstairs. That's when I realized it wasn't just the man outside. More than one person had broken into the house. I didn't have time to think. I jumped out of bed and as quietly as I could, slipped out of the room and into the next one. I closed the door behind me and went straight into the closet. To understand why I did that, I need to explain how that closet was set up. I'm a small, thin woman, about 5'3". The closet was built in, and at first glance it looked completely normal, just a rectangular space. But on the right side, there was a narrow hidden area filled with boxes and old junk. If you didn't already know it was there, you'd never notice it. I crawled inside, shifted the boxes around, and then stacked them back in front of me, layering them, so they completely blocked me from view while I curled up behind them. As soon as I climbed inside, I heard heavy footsteps upstairs, already in the hallway. He didn't hesitate. He moved, like he knew exactly where he was going. He was in my room. I could hear him breaking things, banging stuff around, yelling. He sounded completely out of his mind, and I honestly couldn't even understand what was happening. At that point, he didn't feel like a person to me anymore. He felt dangerous and unpredictable. Nothing about it felt normal. After a few minutes, I heard him step into the hallway, and I could tell his footsteps were getting closer. My heart was pounding so hard, I was barely breathing, terrified of making even the smallest sound. I really thought that was it. From where I was hiding, I couldn't see anything. Just darkness, the smell of fabric and dust, and the weight of the boxes pressed against me. Then I heard the closet door open, and I could hear him breathing, fast and strained. And in those few seconds, all I could think was, if he just reaches up, if he looks a little harder, that's it. But he didn't. He just stood there for a moment, and then he moved away. That's when he started destroying the room. Furniture getting knocked over, drawers being yanked out and slammed into the walls. At one point he screamed, not because he was scared, but because he was angry. I remember thinking about what kind of person does something like that, and more importantly, who the person outside was, and whether there were only two of them. This went on for hours. I could hear him moving through the house, slamming into walls, yelling that he was going to find me. Sometimes, everything would go completely quiet, and then the noise would start all over again. At one point, I smelled cigarettes, and that's when it hit me that the second person had come inside too. I stayed curled up in the dark, just listening. I could hear them talking to each other, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Eventually, everything went quiet, but I still didn't move. It was still dark outside, and I had no idea how long they'd been there. Then I heard footsteps again. They hadn't left. They were waiting for me to come out, but I didn't. When I finally saw a faint light, it was already dawn. Not long after that, I heard the back door open and then close. I waited a long time before I moved. I was terrified it might be a trap. I cracked the door open slowly and made my way back to my room. The room was destroyed. I grabbed my phone and hid again while I called the police, whispering like they might still be there. When the police arrived, the entire house was wrecked. Later, they told me they'd found knives from my kitchen left in different places, including one in the hallway, and that it was clear the man had been searching for me because nothing had been stolen. I moved out that same day. The police stayed while I packed my things just to make sure I was safe. I quit my job and went back to live with my parents. The scariest part wasn't that someone broke into my house. It was that they came in with intent, and that in just a few hours, the place I thought was safe had become completely defenseless.